Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Ireland Council and Mr. Gibbon and administration for our meeting today. Hope everybody had a lovely Thanksgiving weekend. I'd just like to start this morning because we're still waiting for our new acknowledgement. The municipality of Jasper respectfully acknowledge that Jasper National Park and the municipality of Jasper are on Treaty 6-8 and the new Jasper House region, and that we are the traditional territory meeting grounds and gathering places for many Indigenous groups within the national park. Everybody has, I'll call the meeting to order. It is 9:31. Is there any additions to today's agenda? Can I have approval of the agenda that's on front of us today? Councillor Hakone? All in favor? That is carried. Today we have circulated in front of us the committee of the whole meeting minutes that were approved at the last council meeting. Is there any business arising from those minutes? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Keller. I just wonder if there's an update on the presentation that was made and it's referenced in those minutes for the winter hockey tournament. Anything further on that at this point?
Go ahead, Mr. Gibbon.
Yeah, absolutely. Administration's been working with Tourism Jasper and their hired project manager. We have been working to identify sort of the specifics of what the design would be. We've given approval to the project manager to submit all the development permit applications that need to be submitted to Parks Canada on our behalf. And so all that work's underway. We don't have an ETA yet. The priority for the business community is certainly around that sort of early November through to December time period. But I know the ice is in the arena, and I know that both practices have already started. And so, you know, our local youth are already starting their games on our ice, and we continue to work with Tourism Jasper and the business community on implementing the external dressing rooms for the winter season.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon. Any other business arising? And Mr. Gibbon, we have no delegations or correspondence for today. New business 7.1.
According to Wikipedia,
learning
it is a
and
follow-up.
childhood care strategy. I presume I'll hand this over to Ms. Daniels.
Oh, there we go. Thanks. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So I'm back to bring you the draft early learning and childcare strategy. This item was originally brought forward in April 2023 and last month again as a draft community childcare strategy. We're calling this document Jasper's Community Childcare Strategy as it relates to the community's childcare needs and how the community can support childcare in the future. This strategy is also focused on all ages of childcare, not just early learning. And we thought the title best reflected the action items inside the document. So the strategy before you this morning includes a number of the action items based on the recommendations in the ELCC report you received back in December 2022 from the U of A researchers. And while this document that we have, or that you have in front of you this morning, is very similar to what we brought forward in September, you'll see the specific changes that we discussed at last committee the whole are in red, and I'm going to go through those with you. So if you have the document in front of you, there is one change on page 3 that I wanted to highlight first. It's not in red. During our discussions at last committee the whole, there were times when the current state and the future vision were brought up. And I want to remind council and those listening in the public that this was what the researchers found. This isn't necessarily what the municipality is saying the current state and the future vision is, although definitely our voice was in that research report as well. So I just added the line, here is what we heard, so that you realize that this is not necessarily what administration is bringing forward. These are the things that we heard. There was lots of questions about that piece in the last committee of the whole, so I wanted to clarify that with all of you. So if we go to page 7, which is the accessibility section, you will see that there is 2 action items in red. Those would be the ones that were changed based on council's ideas from our last meeting. So one was action item, research becoming a family day home agency to assist residents in starting private day homes in Jasper and bring a report to council. And then the other one was under improving the quantity and diversity of physical childcare spaces, and that is explore the possibility of satellite childcare locations for Wildflowers Childcare in Jasper and report to council for consideration. So those were the first 2. If we flip the page or scroll down, for affordability, there was no changes based on our conversations with council from the last committee of the whole meeting. But on page 9, under flexibility, there is a few. So for the strategy, increase the number of hours per day that childcare options are available. We've amended 2 of the action items. So the first one was explore the costs associated with offering weekday extended hours childcare in the municipal budget for consideration. And then the second item was explore the costs associated with offering weekend childcare and report to council for consideration. I think originally we had these 2 items together. The reason I separated them because they are very different items. For us to extend our weekday hours, we could do that a lot easier than adding weekend care. Weekend care would bring in a lot of other additional things like union agreements and different employer contracts. So I did separate them so that we could look at them separately. For the strategy, increase the number of part-time childcare options. The change was made to explore the costs of providing part-time childcare at Wildflowers and report to council for consideration. In inclusivity, so that would be on page 10 of your document. There's a couple changes to this area as well. So under the first strategy, we did change the wording to explore opportunities to provide more recreation-based childcare options and report to council for consideration. And then the second one was determine the cost of an inclusive childcare coordinator position to support children with diverse needs and present to council for consideration. On page 11, there's 2 items under the quality section. So under the second strategy, you'll see the first action item, develop a plan to organize and offer training in Jasper for childcare providers. And then under the third strategy, we changed the wording to consider offering a single bonus to qualified ECEs who are willing to move to Jasper for work. And then in the advocacy and leadership item, there was no changes to that one as well. So those were the major changes that we discussed at the Committee of the Whole meeting in September. And I just want to add that should council adopt the strategy, the action items would be incorporated in future plans and financial considerations would be presented to council as part of the annual budget process. And I will take any questions that anyone has.
Mr. Council, any questions for Ms. Daniels? Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, Acting Deputy Mayor, title is. I may have missed this last time you presented, but recreation-based childcare options, like what would be an example of that? I know it's for older kids. Is it out of school care sort of scenario, or what would that look like?
Acting Mayor Kelleher, MP through to Councillor Hall. It could be a number of things. So at one point, so as many of you know, the Community Development Department now encompasses recreation. And at one time there was a number of camps that were open in the summer. And while we may not continue to do that in the same style that we once did, we could offer different types of recreation opportunities that would be a form of childcare for those age groups.
Can I keep it? It's okay. More of a comment. I'm not sure who's listening in, but Ms. Daniels was at the Alberta Municipality Conference with us last week and spoke on a panel regarding childcare as economic growth strategy. And I'm wondering if somewhere in this heading, quality childcare is critical to economic growth, workforce participation, and that workforce participation. I wonder if that could be in there somewhere, because it was a really, I'm not sure who said it on that, but it was a great panel. Also, as far as affordability goes, the last day of the conference, I was able to ask Minister Turton a question regarding the bilateral agreement with the federal government and when that might come into play in Alberta. And the answer I got from him was 2027. So just want to pass that on to the public so people are a bit aware of what is happening in our province. And I think the idea of an inclusive childcare coordinator is absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Other questions? Ms. Samuels? Councillor Waxer?
Good morning. The one thing that as I was reading through the report, the one thing that I wondered about was we talk about exploring the costs, but there may be other issues that arise other than just financial cost. And I wondered, I was hesitating about putting my hand up because I couldn't think of the correct word, but challenges or obstacles or something along that are also that are associated with it. An example I could think of was the having determine the cost and challenges of an inclusive childcare coordinator, because one of the challenges from my perspective would be, well, it's a really critically important role, and there are it would be very valuable to our community. It feels to me like it's more of a provincial responsibility, and worry about having them off the hook if we take care of it ourselves. So I saw that some of the others, there's not only another risk, or maybe the word is risk, with the giving new staff a bonus, and one of the risks might be that some of the other staff are feeling uncomfortable or unvalued.
Mr. Gibbon.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Keller, MP. I think all those points are appreciated, and I think we need to remember the context of this plan. Any individual action would not happen until we came back to council. I mean, that's explicitly the changes that we made. And so an analysis of financial risks, of reputational risks, of alternate funding sources, whether things are our responsibility or not, that type of detailed analysis would happen on any one of these issues as we would bring them forward to council for determination. So, there are, as Councillor Waxer identifies, each one of these issues is multi-layered, and there are definitely lots to them. And that's why each one of them, as we would come forward, would get the full council RFD treatment that would do a financial analysis, discussion, the whole thing. This is intended to be fairly high level, to look at the themes that arose from the public, and to say, okay, so what types of actions should the municipality consider? Not necessarily do, but what types of actions should the municipality consider? And then the choice of whether we do them or not, and if we do them, how fast, and if we do them, how to finance them or other considerations, would all be decisions that would come back to council with that full workup from administration, to make sure that we get into all of those layers, like council's identified about, whose responsibility is this? How might we finance this? How will this impact our current staff, and how will this benefit the community ultimately? But again, this is intended to provide that high level guidance about that will enable administration to develop our work plan of the types of things that we'll bring forward to council over the next couple of years, because this is intended to be a multi-year plan, and it certainly isn't anything that we're going to solve in a single year.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon. Good questions from Ms. Tongles? Mayor.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor Kelleher, through you to Ms. Daniel. Thank you for the work that you've done since we met about a month ago. I appreciate that. Sorry about that. I will say that again. Thank you for the work you've done since we met about a month ago. And I regret doing this, but I'm going to bring up some new issues that we didn't discuss previously, which hit me as I read this in preparation for today. A couple of questions, starting with indicators. So the consultant assessed the current level. Most of the indicators, if not all of them, are based on numbers. And what I'm wondering is whether there is a baseline so that we have a starting point to measure progress. So the indicators simply say we will look at the number of childcare hours. So we must have a baseline for all of those. And I'm not suggesting that they have to be in the strategy. I'm just asking in terms of implementing a strategy, has that baseline been developed so that we can objectively measure progress?
Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP to Mayor Ireland. I would say yes, in most cases, there would be a baseline. Some of those numbers we could get from current families who are already attending. Some of them may be more qualitative, though, measurements, and might be a little bit harder to measure as far as, number of families who can afford childcare, right? So it would be, would we be doing means testing? Probably not. So we would base it on just qualitative data from a survey. Or maybe the number of families who are currently accessing childcare subsidy, which has increased since the province changed their limits. But there is still families who wouldn't qualify.
Right, I can understand it. There may not be exactitude in everything, but some base when we talk about a numbers progression just seems useful to me. And again, just thinking downstream, not for the strategy itself, but to give you a tool to measure progress and to give us and the community a tool to measure progress.
Mr. Given?
Deputy Mayor Keller MP for Mayor Ireland. Yeah, that's exactly why administration included indicators. So because we know that council and the community would say, okay, so how do we know whether the plan is on track or not, or what we're making progress or not? I think it's fair to say that in a number of these, when administration would start their work on any of these items, again, subject to council approval, where it's required, we would start and say, okay, what is the number today? And I think you're right, Mayor Ireland, that that's an essential element. I don't think administration has all of the indicators in a book somewhere today. But before we would start work, we'd say, okay, so as of right now, what are the number of regional childcare network gatherings that we've attended this year? 0 or 10. And then we say, okay, so next year we would like to attend more than we did this year. So they are probably rolling items, but no, there isn't an existing list of all of the numbers that would equate to each one of these indicators. The intention here is to say, over the term of this plan, let's work to increase on each of these indicators, whether they're subjective or objective. In order to be able to measure that increase, we would have to establish the baseline when we started work on any of those items.
Thank you, Mr. Given.
Thank you. I have just a couple more quickly. Just some comments, questions with respect to the actions. What would an on-demand pop-up childcare service look like?
Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP through to Mayor Ireland. That could look different depending on what the needs of the community are. So sometimes that could look like something like our indoor play group. So you have, you say, you know, childcare will be available tomorrow from 9 to 12. We're going to be in the multipurpose hall using the indoor play group equipment. We can take this many children. I know that currently there is a indoor play place in town called Cubs. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but they are doing something similar. They're doing like a pop-up childcare. When you are an unlicensed childcare, you can only take up to 6 children. So there is a kind of a max at 6 for that. But that is something that the owners noted was a need in our community and are starting to do it. So it can look different depending on the needs.
Thank you for that. On page 10, under inclusivity, we spoke last month about the inclusive child care coordinator potential position, and you've adjusted that wording. Later on that page, the bottom 2 actions under the 4th strategy. I take it that hiring is not indicative of positions, but more consultation. Is that a fair assessment?
Yep, that would be a fair assessment.
Okay. Under quality, under the 1st strategy, if the municipality gets to a position where it issues business licenses for in-home childcare, I presume there must be standards that have to be achieved. And I'm wondering, as the business license issuer, what sort of obligations we would have for monitoring adherence to quality standards. And I'm thinking specifically about the egregious case in Calgary last month and what that might mean for us.
Acting Deputy Mayor Keller and be through to Mayor Ireland. I haven't looked into it a lot because I wanted to make sure that we're going forward with the strategy, but the city of Calgary is requiring it now, that day homes get a business license through the city. So I definitely think we could build upon something that's already being done and get the standards. But there would be definitely monitoring, but not in a licensed way. It would mean that we would, or the municipality would be monitoring them as far as a business activity. And it wouldn't be like a family day home where someone would go out and make sure that they're meeting the quality standards for childcare licensing, because it might not be a licensed. It would likely not be a licensed in-home childcare. So they wouldn't have to necessarily meet the licensing standards. They would have to meet whatever the municipality set as the business license standard. It's just another way to add to a layer of quality and also making sure that they're being held to a bit of a higher standard and not just opening something in their house and having 20 children each day.
I get that. I'm just looking at who then becomes responsible and liable for proper monitoring and enforcement of whatever the quality standards are. But I take it that will roll out as Mr. Given indicated earlier. There would be some research that would come back to council. We would get a picture of what the rollout might look like if we went that way.
Yes.
Thank you. I have one final observation, and this goes back to the question asked by Councillor Hall, and that it relates to advocacy and leadership. And my observation there is that all of the strategies are focused external to our community. So provincial, federal, other municipalities. And I wonder whether there would be a benefit in having some focus on advocacy at the local level, particularly as we recognize as a priority, and it's included in the list of priorities early in the document, the fundamental importance of the tourism economy. But it just seems to me that there is an opportunity here to show leadership and an advocacy role internally in the community to highlight the importance of childcare to the tourism economy. And, you know, I would think that the strategy would benefit from a recognition that that is a goal that we should be pursuing.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Other questions? I have one. We signed those in the report, and we show that we're looking for bonuses for people to sign. Which Jasper, how many workers are we currently charged with our permanent ticket?
We could probably use one more. Since meeting with you in September, I have hired 2 new staff. One is from town and one is from out of town. So we are trying to recruit regionally if we can. But with the nature of our industry and with the nature of a lot of industries right now, and the age group and the demographic, I have staff who are going to go on mat leave soon. So then we'll be replacing them. I have another staff who the end of their contract is in December. So, you know, I think we could always use one more person. And between our 2 programs right now, we have 23 staff.
So with the increase of staff, with the increased spaces, or that's just to maintain the current level?
Currently, we would be maintaining. I'm hoping that with the addition of the second new person in November, we could increase our numbers, but that would depend on whether we cover the maternity leave coming up or not.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
No other questions? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Keller MP. Just for my own clarity, the different actions that are going to be contemplated, there'll be kind of a short-term, mid-term, and longer-term progression with those, I assume. And when we come to the budget, we may not see all of these. We may see only 1 or 2, or as we move forward with the ones, I guess, that are most doable in the short term. And would there be that type of, I don't know if it'd be that detailed, but in the budget saying, you know, this is a 2-year or 3-year type of opportunity. We don't see ourselves at this point being able to execute this action, but we're investigating to be able to do it 2 years from now.
Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP through to Councillor Melnick. Yes, that I think is the intended plan of the strategy, that some of those items could be done in the next year. And then again, some of them would be long-term, probably coming to council for consideration and then moving forward with them in the later years of the strategy.
And just with our changes in the activity center with the addition of an elevator, will that create additional spaces that may be available for some of that programming to occur 2 and 3 years from now when the current renovation program is completed?
Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP through to Councillor Melnick. I would say that there's definitely opportunities for more care in the building, but I don't know what these spaces will be used for down the road. We are currently using 2 of the rooms downstairs for out of school care, and we could grow in those spaces without needing additional space down there. It's the 0 to 5 age group that would need more of the space somewhere in the building.
Great, thank you.
No other questions? Thank you, Ms. Daniels. Do I have a councillor willing to make a motion? I think we have, oh, sorry, Councillor Waxer. Go ahead. You need to unmute.
Just give me 1 second.
Sure.
That committee recommend council adopt Jasper's early learning and childcare strategy as presented.
Need debate? Or
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP. I am concerned about still the absence of an internal focus for advocacy. I think that, well, I agree that childcare is an economic driver, particularly in this community, and internal or local focus on advocacy and leadership is critical to success. I think that recognition in the strategy of promoting the value of daycare to the tourism economy is critical. So I'm not suggesting much of an overhaul, but I would like to see the inclusion of, say, an advocacy strategy similar to the second one there, but it might say foster increase awareness, coordination, and collaboration between local stakeholders who are or could become involved in the provision of licensed childcare. And I know again that we've been discouraged from friendly amendments, so I could make a motion to amend the motion so that we don't approve the strategy as presented, but as amended with that as the amendment. I haven't flushed it out with the relevant actions and indicators, but I would be content to leave that to staff if council is interested in that addition. We're in debate now, but I see that Ms. Daniel wants to speak. I leave that to the chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Daniel.
Okay, thanks, Acting Deputy Mayor Keller Humpy. Through to Mayor Ireland. Could we look at page 7 for a second and see if maybe there's something on the accessibility page that might add to what you're saying? So under the second strategy, there's connect with local businesses to assess the opportunity for on-site childcare. I know that we're not necessarily promoting the value of it. I think that in our day-to-day work, we promote the value of childcare in the community. So there's also explore the potential for collaboration with community groups in the delivery of childcare. Are either of those something leaning towards what you're thinking?
They are consistent with what I am thinking.
Okay.
I'm just thinking that we should take an active advocacy role locally about the value, which might mean that you make a similar presentation to the Chamber of Commerce, to the Rotary Club, to Tourism Jasper. Internal awareness of the value of this to the local economy, I think, is critical to success. And so, yes, accessibility is part of it, but it seems to me that's likely to be more narrowly targeted. And I'm thinking about advocacy at a broader level within the community. I mean,
Okay.
I can let it go. It's just a suggestion to council for the time being.
I'm on board with the suggestion, and if you want us to change it, we can. It's entirely up to council at this point.
Mr. Gibbon.
Thanks very much. So, Your Worship, I think I have some sense of the types of things that you'd be talking about. I can describe what I think I've heard and some potential in terms of the strategy actions, and then I would need to think a little bit more about indicators. But if what I described seems like the right path, then council could make a motion to, committee could make a motion that council approve the childcare strategy with amendments as discussed. And then that way we could update the document before it comes to regular council next week. And then you can see if the actual text that we present next week is correct. So in terms of a strategy, it sounds like something along the lines of foster a greater understanding of the role of childcare in supporting the tourism economy as a strategy. The actions that could go along with that would be work with local employers to assess and quantify the childcare needs among employees. Work with local employers to quantify the fiscal impacts of childcare. I say fiscal impacts because there are costs and benefits, costs of the absence of childcare and benefits of the provision of childcare. So impacts is capture both of those. And then promote the value of childcare within the Jasper community. And that kind of gets to the point about the municipality actively within our local community, talking about the role that childcare plays in the tourist-based economy. And then I would need to think a little bit about what the indicators around that would look like, that maybe are up top, there might be multiple, but we could probably describe those before next week pretty easily. But I think that, again, they're high level. It would be something like a number of social media posts about the importance of childcare, the number of presentations given about the importance of childcare, the collection of data that we have as a resource that we can use with provincial, federal governments, and local stakeholders about the fiscal impacts of childcare. Those are all the types of indicators that I would mention. So if that strategy and those three associated actions seem pretty close, then maybe the motion would be to approve with amendments as discussed. And then we can make those amendments and you can see what they look like in text next week.
Councillor Waxer, are you willing to reword your motion?
I have no concerns.
Everyone will sign the motion. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Stanley. Thank you, Stu. Indoor track feasibility. Mr. Given.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Gallagher MP. I believe Ms. Riddell is also on Zoom. She was the report writer. As you can see, it's been reviewed by a number of members of the team, but I think Lisa can introduce the report for us.
Welcome, Ms. Riddell.
Thanks. Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you. Good morning, Deputy Mayor Keller MP and all of Council. The report in front of you is for the indoor track feasibility. On August 22nd, committee heard from a resident suggesting that an indoor track would be of value as a recreation facility. Committee referred the concept of an indoor track at that time to administration to provide a report back on potential next steps, specifically including consideration of a feasibility study. So administration got together, and as you can see on the report, several people got together to discuss both the concept of an indoor running track as well as the consideration of a feasibility study for this infrastructure specifically, and weighed the infrastructure as well as the feasibility study against other factors like potential cost, the operational impact, and particularly we looked at the existing public sentiment to just give us an idea of whether that infrastructure concept was supported more broadly in the community. So in order to look at the data, we reviewed the notes from community conversations, as well as the existing culture and recreation facilities and services review. So the review was undertaken. I should first actually note that an indoor track didn't come up specifically in community conversations over 2022 and 2023, although items like increasing access to non-structured recreational opportunities did come up. So in a really broad sense, recreation definitely came up, just not a running track or an indoor track specifically. Within the culture and recreation facilities and services review, for context, it was undertaken from May 2019 into early 2020, and it was adopted by Council on July 6, 2021. And Section 5 of that report shares a vision for culture and rec in Jasper, that recreation and culture services give people in Jasper the opportunity to be active and creative, improving their individual health and enabling them to connect to each other and to their community. And the public at the time and the engagement to create this report identified 21 service outcomes. So this is just the types of results we want to see, and that's identified on page 54 of the report. 21 different outcomes. And then section 6 of the report then proposes a framework for identifying infrastructure focus areas that would help, I guess, the municipality prioritize investment. So within section 6 on page 61, there's a list of infrastructure focus areas that were ranked by the public. These are the infrastructure areas that were at least aligned with and were able to contribute to achieving 1/3, just 7 or more of the service outcomes identified. So there's other infrastructure areas that didn't make it onto this list, but within the list, the chart does show an indoor track ranking pretty low. I think it's second to lowest. And so we included the chart just for council's reference. So you can see the top ranked ones in the light pink, medium in blue, and then the lowest ones in green. So with this data and the existing public sentiment that we have on record right now, administration's recommendation is to receive the input. Of course, it's always nice to receive input from the public, and ensure that the concept of an indoor track is considered alongside other recreation amenities in any future engagements or planning activities. In terms of legislation or relevant, policies, we thought the ED&I policy was related. When we looked at the inclusion considerations more broadly, we really felt like going back to the engagement we had is just one way that we can include the resident sentiment that we have on record in the decision-making process. And it seems that from the list of infrastructure focus areas, an indoor track is one of many recreation amenities that are accessible and can be made accessible to serve our diverse community. So to note, the financial resources to conduct public participation or engagement on an indoor track is within the existing budget, but the financial resources to undertake a feasibility study specific to this infrastructure is not in the budget. I will do my best to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dow. Questions from Mr. Dow? Councillor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Keller MP. I just wanted to first start by saying thank you for the report and going back to the Culture and Recreational Facilities and Services Review and presenting this chart, which does represent a recent survey of our residents as to what is considered a higher priority by the residents that responded and than other priorities. I'm not saying that anyone is significantly less. There just seems to be more people that may be interested in different types of facilities. And I think that might help us to evaluate when limited funds are available as to what areas do we invest in when it comes to feasibility studies. Well, there's sometimes this grant funding available for that. There is only so much grant funding to go around. And I think we just need to be cautious as we go forward in budget 24 that we don't start going in a variety of directions. We probably need to have a little bit more of a discussion and focus as to what opportunities we do wish to pursue, which would be to the greatest benefit of our residents.
Thank you for that, Councillor Melnick. Any other questions or comments? Mayor.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor Keller. I want to join Councillor Melnick in thanking you, Mr. Dell, for drawing the Culture and Recreation Facilities and Services Review to our attention. Something that Council might have commented on when we first heard the presentation, but really useful to have it. My observation is more for Council. I think it's great to see that chart taken from that review document. But it is curious how council will approach that priority listing. I accept, again, the comments of Councillor Melnick, but we are well advanced on a skateboard park, which I don't see on the list unless you call that a wheeled sports venue. And then it is low. So I'm trying to recall, I presume that we accepted that Culture and Recreation Facilities and Services review document for information. Did we make any other determination based on that? And I say this just for future. I'm content with the recommendation that has come forward and I support it. But I think council will, or at least ought to, consider how we might use this chart going forward, because we might already have made determinations that are not necessarily consistent with the information that we received.
Mhm.
Mr. Gibbon?
Yeah, so Deputy Mayor Keller, MP for Mayor Ireland. So yes, council actually adopted the facilities and services review. So it was actually adopted by council. So it's on the books, so to speak. That was in 2021. I think it's fair to say that the discussion around the skateboard park started well before 2021. Fundraising certainly started before that. And I think council, the review document should be a question that council says, you know, when an item comes up that has to do with recreation and culture, council say, well, what did the review say? I don't think that there's any challenge necessarily in doing something that's on there. This is not a do number one first and then do number two and then do number three type document, but it does give a sense and a snapshot in time sense of the community's level of interest in different things. And so if something was lower on the list, but somebody said, well, we'll raise 3/4 of the money or 2/3 of the money and we'll show up, well, then maybe it's something that you can see your way to supporting. It was a long-standing effort in the community. Then maybe there'd be other reasons. But I think this table gives council an opportunity for a little bit of a, well, what is generally on the minds of the community, or was generally on the minds of the community back then? And there better be a pretty good reason why we would do something. In the case of the running track, we've had one presentation to council. As Ms. Riddell said, we haven't been seeing themes of this coming up through community conversations over the last 2 years. And it was relatively low on the list during the services review. So all of those things together, maybe say, well, interesting idea. And maybe we should explore that more the next time the municipality is looking at doing recreation amenities or facilities. If the community wanted to do something different, then certainly we can't stop anybody from advancing an idea or an issue. But I don't think that all of the indicators here really sort of suggest this is not as broadly supported in the community as other activities that are currently out there.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Any other questions or comments? Sorry, Ms. Riddell, go ahead.
Just to give context, thank you. Sorry, Deputy Mayor Keller MP through to Mayor Ireland. A skate park is included in the wheeled sports venues. What's included in that is the skateboard park and a bike skills park. And so we did look at that within the report. It's included within that categorization and lands as a medium kind of priority.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that response. That's the only one that I could find for it on there. So I thought maybe it fit there. I wonder, Mr. Gibbon, can you tell us what we might have meant when we adopted the report rather than received it for information. I haven't gone back to look at the actual motion from July of 2021, which was previous council. I'm just curious. It's not consistent with much of the wording we use, and it's the wording that's used in the briefing notes. So I just wonder what we thought we meant.
Deputy Mayor Keller, MP for Mayor Island. Yeah, I believe that the intent was to ensure that the plan had some status, or the document has some status. There had been a past practice of a number of this item, I believe, was initiated by last council. The council really ran that process, and there was a document that didn't get completed and didn't get to the council table. And so in 2021, we brought it to the council table. Council said, yes, this is the document. And we actually had a couple of iterations of it and some revisions. And council said, yes, this is the document. Great. It now has some standing within administration, which is different than it just being received for information. Council receiving something for information says, yeah, that's fine. We hear that. But we don't necessarily endorse it. Where an adoption by council says, yes, this is ours. Now administration go away and start to use this as you plan your work. And that's, I think, the difference in terminology there. I think the practice that we would see now is more recommendations from administration to adopt plans, as you just saw with the childcare plan.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon, for that. And I do remember us adopting that document, and I remember the comments around it was that we would use this for future planning, and that whatever plans we were using for whether the rec center or anything, that we were to look at this document and the recommendation of this document and to see if both matched. Do I have a councillor willing to make a motion? Here
I will make the motion that committee direct administration include the concept of an indoor track alongside other recreation features in future public engagement focused on recreation outcomes or infrastructure.
is the discussion on the motion. Any other comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Riddell, for the report. And we are on to 7.3, board skill matrix, Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation. And I believe this is you, Mr. Gibbon. Pelche.
Sir, Ms. Pelche is here, obviously our municipal housing coordinator and our dedicated resource on all things housing related. And so Leanne will introduce the report. And I'll just note that this was previously presented to the JCHC board recently. And so Leanne has revised the matrix based on some of the feedback received from the board. Yeah.
Good morning, Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP and Council. The RFD before you asks you to consider the Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation Board Skills Matrix for Director Selection as recommended by the Board of Directors of the JCHC. Some background: on August 15th, 2023, a public hearing was held to establish the Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation. At the meeting, motions were passed allowing for the creation of the MCC. Within the province of Alberta, the Municipal Government Act allows a municipality to establish and control a corporation if a resolution is passed. This corporation is a legally separate entity governed by the appointed board of directors and formalized through a unanimous shareholders agreement and articles of incorporation. Article 2 of the JMHC unanimous shareholders agreement presented at the public hearing stipulates the following with regard to governance of the corporation and board makeup. That the board shall consist of an odd number of directors, up to 7 directors, and that the MOJ has the sole and unfettered right to elect, appoint, and remove any director from time to time. With the creation of the MCC, board member selection and appointment is necessary under the MGA, the Business Corporations Act, and the Unanimous Shareholders Agreement. At the September 21st Jasper Community Housing Corporation meeting, the JCHC board received a draft JMHC board skills matrix. And after discussion, the following motion was passed: to amend the draft board competency matrix as discussed and forward it to Municipal Council for consideration. So the next steps to incorporate and register the MCC include establishing the board of directors. This process will be undertaken by the Municipality of Jasper and Council as per Section 2 of the USA. Successful applicants will be appointed by Council, appointees will be designated directors, and make up the JMHC board. The board member selection process is critical for maintaining the integrity and effectiveness of an organization's governing body. It is important to determine what qualities and areas of expertise to seek in board members that will contribute most to the board's success. A board skills matrix is a valuable tool for organizations, particularly board of directors, to ensure that they have the right mix of skills, knowledge, and experience among their members. Benefits of using a board skills matrix are further outlined in the RFD in more detail. Essentially, the board skills matrix tool illustrates that a board as a collective entity has expertise and experience in all required areas by ensuring individual directors who are appointed to the board have complementary skills. It highlights areas of strength and identifies potential gaps that may require attention or recruitment of directors with specific expertise. Acknowledging that the JCHC will be dissolved with the incorporation of the JMHC, directors of the JCHC at the September 21st meeting identified qualities, areas of expertise, and experience that would be beneficial to a board whose strategic goals and mission focus on developing housing in the local context. Main categories include industry and domain experience, affordable housing, leadership skills, legal and regulatory knowledge, financial acumen, and community and stakeholder engagement. You'll see before you the last page of the RFD includes a draft JMHC board skills matrix where applicants are rated on a scale, none, low, medium, and high, with the goal of having all desired skills represented within the collective board, rather than to have all the skills within individual board members. So you'll note this example of a completed JMHC board skills matrix illustrates how the complementary skills of 3 candidates ensure the board as a whole has the necessary skills, expertise, and experience. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. Questions for Ms. Fletcher? You're right.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Councillor. I wonder about just a couple of things, and in particular, whether there is a skill set that can be identified that relates to or recognition or awareness of emerging trends. So not quite a futurist, but somebody that is a real forward thinker. Because of course with housing, we're looking at buildings that will stand for 50 years or more, and not easy to change or retrofit necessarily. So when we look at building housing, we want to be sure that it's the housing that we're going to need, not just today, but tomorrow and next year and onwards. And I just wonder whether there is a way to encapsulate that sort of skill set in the matrix. I just leave that with you. It's hard even to articulate what I'm thinking about, but we have knowledge of how the market has changed over the last number of years and what our current needs are, but are those needs likely to change, and who can best give us some insight into that, and would that be a useful person to have on the board, or a skill set to have on the board? Secondly, this could come under leadership skills or legal and regulatory knowledge, but beyond strategic planning, I think a board is benefited by having at least some individuals who are knowledgeable about process, because it's not just all strategic. To be effective, boards have to conduct useful meetings, and that skill set at the board level, I think is critical to successful functioning of a board. And then finally, I'm not sure, again, if there's a way to describe a skill set or a competency that reflects an awareness of inclusion and diversity tools. So I was really intrigued by the inclusion consideration, where you're looking at objectifiable skills to remove subjective biases, and yet the people with the skills may have their own subjective bias because they've never been involved in an inclusive build. And so how do we get that expertise in inclusion and diversity onto the board? Is there a skill set that could be described so that we could attract board members who would help open a window into inclusion and diversity in terms of the housing needs for current and future residents?
Mr. Dibben?
Thanks very much, Deputy Keller. A couple of points based on the discussion raised by the mayor. I think first, starting backwards, the ED&I consideration, that's something that I think that probably is a worthwhile line around leadership skills. So maybe something along the lines of knowledge of equity, diversity, and inclusion fundamentals. So an understanding that there is such a thing as equity, diversity, and inclusion, and maybe some people would have higher or lower understanding of that, but we would want some of that represented within the board. The second was maybe again within leadership skills. It was the best place experience with policy development, and so somebody who understands, and that would be a different skill set from what a private business operator might bring, right? And this is an example of how you're going to have a governance board. You want to have a bunch of different perspectives, and not all private business operators would understand how important policy is to governance. So experience with policy development might get at that. And then the final one, which was the first of the points raised by Mayor Ireland, the sort of futurist. I appreciate the challenge in putting a name on that, but that might be represented in the industry and domain experience, where we say, well, we want some real estate development experience, some building construction experience, some staff accommodation provider experience. What are staff asking for these days, and how is that different than what they might have asked for in the past? And I would be cautious about putting too heavy a weight on that, because we are not asking the board to design the building. We are going to be, certainly with the first building, we'll have a design competition where our pre-qualified proponents will propose designs. And so, so they should be the experts in flexibility of design or future proofing. And then it will be up to the board to assess that against their experience to say, okay, yeah, this fits what I think I've heard from the employees that we've provided staff accommodation for, or this fits with my experience around construction of buildings and trends that are seen in the industry. So I don't know that I would identify a specific skill. I think it's something that we would want that knowledge within board members. And we would assess their industry experience in those different areas. But again, not putting too heavy a weight on that because we're actually going to ask building designers to design the buildings for us. So those two, I think we can include under leadership skills. That made sense. And then the third, I think, is sort of implied within industry and domain experience.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gibbon. Other questions? Councillor Waxer.
And not so much a question, but just to express appreciation to Mayor Ireland for noting that I too had toyed with that concept, and I think it's a really good addition.
The question, so will these positions be advertised locally or the board or regionally or?
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP. Yes, there will be, this will be advertised for the public. We invite anyone to apply. There was discussion at the JCHC meeting around where we can get some of the expertise that we think we'll need. And that included obviously within Jasper as well as outside of our community and potentially with other organizations, local government organizations or arm's length local government organizations that have developed affordable housing.
Great, thank you for that. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Keller MP. I was going to go quickly and look and find the other sections of the appointment of directors. The section referred to 2.01 of the JMHC Unanimous Shareholders Agreement. On this particular board, the directors, are council members included in that board for the purposes of the Unanimous Shareholders Agreement, or are council members included in the makeup of the MCC?
Thank you. Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP through to Councillor Melnick. There would be 2 councillors appointed as directors to the board. Municipal Council would be appointing all directors and act as shareholders of the MCC.
Right.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So we first, I believe, will need to establish the MCC, which is ongoing right now. And then as I read this, then the members of the public at large do not necessarily need to be investors in the MCC. They could apply to be on this board.
Thank you. Yes, correct. It would be open to the public.
Thank you.
So just on that point, so there would be 2 council members and then 5 public, or 2 council members and 7 public on the board, or is it total 7 board?
Thank you. Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP. It would be a total of 7 for the board.
Other questions? Mr. Goodman or Ms. Peltier? All right.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. If there are no further comments, I'm prepared to make a motion that committee recommend council approve the Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation board skills matrix with amendments as discussed to include leadership skills, policy development, and inclusion, diversity, and equity knowledge. I'm not sure if anybody can be called an expert. And I would ask, is that clear enough, Mr. Gibbon?
Any other discussion? Or the question, all those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Peltier. Thank you for the report. Okay. For the comfort of staff and council, I'm going to call a 7-minute break. We will come back at 10:50. Welcome back, everybody, and we're going on to 7.4 Hakone Japan Initiative, and it's you, Ms. Nadal. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP. I am here today to present the report on Hakone Japan initiatives, and there are a few items here. And before I start, I would like to suggest that the 3 recommendations as they are presented should perhaps be separate motions as they address pretty separate topics. And this is a combination of organizational meeting is coming up on the 24th. So we wanted to be sure to have that information to you beforehand, but also this item was due to return to council as per the motion action list. And also there's other items in there that just capture the Hakone Japan initiatives conversation. But essentially, in response to some direction that we had from council previously to review and propose a different way of engaging in the Hakone relationship, we've determined that administration's recommendation would be that council direct administration to draft terms of reference for a committee, establishing a clear focus on the Jasper Hakone relationship, and also expanding the membership of that committee to 3 council members as opposed to 2. And then the following recommendation is that committee direct administration to develop an engagement strategy to foster involvement from community partners, residents at large, and the local school community. And then finally, around the high school student exchange program, that committee direct administration to formalize the program by including its oversight in the new terms of reference, as well as developing detailed procedures for the exchange program to establish clear roles and responsibilities. There are a series of alternatives presented in the report, and although administration is not really of the view that any of them are possible, and that's how we came up with the recommendations, we wanted to give you an outline of what we considered and the different ways we could have addressed this issue. And of course, they are still available to committee to decide that that's where we might want to go, but with the exception of terminating the relationship, it is our view that the recommendation is really where it's at. And in a nutshell, summarizing the background, we have a longstanding relationship with Hakone, and we've had a bit of a challenge in keeping it going through different councils, different administrators, It has historically lived with the administrative officer, which is the equivalent of legislative services now. And it is a worthwhile initiative. It is just not one that usually rises to the top of the priority list for council or administration. But yet, anytime we've discussed it with this council and with councils past, there's still a will to be engaged and to be involved. So I think this report sort of presents the budget allocations and the staff time that are required to keep it going. And by formalizing it through the committee and through some more detailed documentation, we think we can then establish this as a part of legislative services that is not going away anytime soon. So again, trying to bring a bit more focus and a concerted effort to prioritize the initiative is sort of the premise behind our recommendations here. And you will note that namely in the recommendation about the committee, we are proposing to disengage from our second sister city relationship or twin community relationship with Wickenburg, Arizona, which is essentially inactive. But to sort of confirm that that's okay. And also there was a part of the Twin Communities and Hospitality Committee, which the hospitality piece, Acting Mayor Kelleher-Hempe, you'll remember that you were quite active for some time, hosting consulate generals and other dignitaries, if you will, from other countries. And we haven't had those types of requests lately. So the hospitality piece is really not that prevalent anymore. And I think the only part that maybe we haven't presented in this report here is actually a name for the committee. So we've proposed a focused Jasper Hakone relationship committee, but we haven't exactly landed on a name. So that would be something to determine through the development of the terms of reference. And then finally, from a financial perspective, there is a motion that was passed in July that allocated the current 2023 $10,000 allocation to support a delegation to Hakone to 2024. So unless there's a further motion from council there, this is one of the unusual items that got voted on prior to the budget cycle. But also looking at the estimated cost for the trip, which I don't have at hand, but we could pull up. It is quite a bit more expensive than it was in the past. So if council wished to support more elected officials attending, then that allocation can be increased a little bit and make the financial burden a bit easier that way. And then as far as the initiatives for the Hakone relationship, we think that we can accommodate them in 2024 within our existing budget. And that for 2025, we would be proposing maybe an allocation to support engagement initiatives or the student exchange program. If we don't get the number of donations that we used to get in the past, then we could be looking at dollars for that. But in 2024, we think we can accommodate it within our current budget and scope. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Thank you for the report. Questions from Mr. Dunn? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Kelleher-Hempe. I'm going to go to the last item first, which is a recommendation formalizing the high school student exchange program. Have we had any discussions with the high schools right now as to their interest in pursuing that particular program?
Thank you for the question, Acting Deputy Mayor Kelleher-Hempe through to Councillor Melnick. Ms. Acorn had done some work on this file earlier in 2023 before we decided that between the delegation hosting the conference and then the student exchange was just an additional item. So there were some preliminary talks. My understanding of how the program currently works is that there is very little involvement from the actual schools. It's more so about the students being interested in participating in the program. And that's where the second sub-bullet in that proposed recommendation suggests that establishing clear roles and responsibilities for the parties involved. Those parties involved are namely the parents. So how much responsibility and ownership and work in terms of taking kids to the airport and back and things like that are they interested in providing is really where it's at. So the school allows us to put posters in the school, but other than that, there's not a ton of involvement from the schools themselves, is my understanding.
In the past, parents were quite involved. Parents were responsible. back in the chamber days of organizing it, the parents were responsible to take the kids to the airport. And they were also responsible when the exchange students came, that they came, and they actually worked back then with the chamber to put the itinerary together for the students that we were hosting. Also back then, the parents also paid a portion of the expense for the students to go to Hakone. It was kind of shared what we collected, and then they had a quarter of it as well.
Thank you for that, Acting Deputy Mayor. I think part of our challenge is that we've lost a longtime employee, Mrs. Cahill left, and we ran the program once after she was gone, and we found out about all the things that weren't documented that used to happen, but that we didn't have a great corporate history or documentation supporting it. And that's why we're suggesting that clear roles and relationships defined exist in other communities, so we can just adapt them and really build some procedures around the program. And then we do think we could run it. I mean, we were concerned from a liability perspective of just sending minors overseas, essentially, but it does seem like other communities do it, and having that document signed by the parents and all that, you know, would provide some good steps and some good support to make sure that the program is delivered as it's intended.
I'm curious why you're dropping the sister city relationship to Wickenville 93. I think none of us ever went, but I think Chief Antiquing went once. I think that was a tourism Jasper initiative when it first started. I'm just curious about it.
Yes, thank you for the question. I believe this was around the Mile Zero rock, and you're right that Chief Van Tegan went down there and rode his bike back, maybe, is how that happened. And it's the other end of Highway 93 is the idea. And I guess the reason we're suggesting to drop it is that Mr. Van Tegan went once, and I think that's the extent of our relationship with Wickenburg. And the challenge we're having with keeping momentum going between Jasper and Hakone, we think that it's partly because it's diluted with hospitality, with a second twin relationship that's not really active. So really dedicating the focus to the Jasper Hakone relationship is our recommendation, to recognize that it's our one, it's the important one, and it's the one that all our efforts are going to go to. So there will be a bit of a communication effort required with Wickenburg if we decide to go that way. But literally, I don't think anything has happened since Greg went. So
Thank you for that. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor. When this came about in the spring, do you know how many residents had signed up, or how many residents were interested in going this fall?
Acting Deputy Mayor Kelleher MP, through to Councillor Hall, we do have that data somewhere. I've got Ms. Acorn signaling to me. It was something like 4 or 5, but then by the time it came down to, like, we need a deposit to book things, some people had scheduling conflicts, some people dropped out, like others just didn't get back to us. So we had expressions of interest, but then when we asked them for their deposit, we didn't hear back from them. And the timeline was getting pretty tight at that stage, and the cost was increasing. And so they might be interested for next year. And I'm thinking that's part of the rationale behind the engagement strategy, is that if we have events and opportunities for people to be engaged in the relationship and learn about Japan and participate in the student exchange, then that will create some momentum towards more people wanting to go to Hakone. But that we need to build a program around those delegations so that we keep a consistent and steady relationship with our Japanese counterparts, and not just visit every 5 years and be so more or less inactive in between.
Go ahead.
My second question, I'm looking at the second recommendation and then the second alternate, which seems sort of similar-ish to me. Is a second alternate the idea that a community-led group would be in charge of this, or is it, would that be in addition to us developing an engagement strategy? Like, what are the differences between those two motions?
Thank you for the question. Yes, so what we're recommending currently is that council establish a committee focused on the Jasper Hakone relationship, And that is composed of 3 council members. So we're not proposing any public representation assigned to that committee, unlike the library board, for example, is probably the best example, or Communities in Bloom is one that's coming up that will need to be reactivated, that will have members of the public appointed to it. The second alternative is essentially the Friendship Society is what we initially thought would be a good way to run this program, which would essentially be a completely separate third-party nonprofit organization, entirely community-led, that would look after the types of items that we're considering here. And while it seems like a good idea on paper for the municipality to maybe decrease the number of resources that we're putting towards the relationship, we don't think that it's a sustainable path forward, as in, are people going to volunteer? Will it actually continue? Is not exactly clear. So that's why we didn't recommend that.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Mallett?
I appreciate in the preamble, the recommendation that each of these be separate recommendations. And I think that's probably the most appropriate way to go, as opposed to trying to do this all under one recommendation. So I think I would start with, as I see no other conversation, that committee direct administration to draft terms of reference to establishing a clear focus on the Japan-Hakone relationship, Jasper-Hakone relationship, and establishing a committee composed of 3 council members and supported by the legislative services team.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor Keller. Speaking to the motion, and I appreciate the suggestion that we divide the questions, but it's difficult to avoid some of the overlap. So what I consider the first motion, particularly establishing a committee composed of 3 council members, and compare that to the next bullet, which isn't yet a motion, directing administration to develop an engagement strategy. It seems to me that part of the engagement strategy could include inviting other public representatives to sit on the committee. So in the background material, there is a reference to discussions at the Jasper Partnership Initiative, with an indication that although there is interest in being supportive, nobody wants to take the lead. But if it was a council or municipally led committee with engagement, that might help us get the community support that we think we need. And so I'm not sure that I want to limit the first of the motions to having the committee comprised only of council members, when I think that that could be a key element in the engagement strategy to involve the community more intimately in the development, say, of plans to visit Hakone. So it might be that we could change the wording of the motion that Councillor Melnick has just made, to establish a committee including 3 members of council, and perhaps something more. I mean, I presume the terms of reference would come back to us, but I'm not prepared to say yet that it should just be a council committee. That there might be a real role for public members.
Mrs. Dunn?
Acting Deputy Mayor Keller MP through to Mayor Ireland. I appreciate the distinction, and I would suggest that the first alternative is what you might consider as the composition of the committee. And I think maybe it's an administrative tendency to take items to the finish line, so I maybe got ahead of myself in the recommendation in terms of really the pressing matter is establishing the number of counselors that will sit on the committee for the purpose of organizational meeting is really the one item that is time sensitive. And then drafting the terms of reference could determine whether this is council only or it has members at large. There is an advertising requirement for those members. So as we will be advertising for library board members, for example, we would be advertising for members to join this committee if that's the direction that's taken by council. And or the current wording says members of the public at large versus if you're contemplating specific community partners, then that's not exactly the same as public at large. But then also the other nuance I'd like to bring forward is that the delegation is one item among a list of items that this committee will be responsible for. So an engagement strategy could target those community partners in the development of the itinerary and the picking up the dates and doing all that. But that there's also a high school exchange program and there's probably other cultural initiatives that would need to take place to keep the relationship alive, which I think the engagement strategy can also happen regardless of the makeup of the committee. So anyways, some options there and hopefully some clarity on what is time sensitive and what is not, which might guide your decision making.
Councillor Malik.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor Keller Murphy. In response to Mayor Ireland's suggestion, I wonder if we could accomplish that by, in the terms of reference specifically, make bullet 2 part of the terms of reference that would be set up for the committee. So in essence, we're doing a time sensitive portion of establishing 3 council members, but the terms of reference would then include, this engagement strategy as to how to best promote the relationship by this committee. I guess to be more clear, if I may, we have the committee established with 3. The committee would receive the terms of reference, or council would receive the terms of reference, which would then direct that committee as to what their purpose would be. And that's where I'm thinking this engagement strategy being defined within the terms of reference will help the committee move forward.
And from there, then invite other partners or for other community members at large to be part of that committee.
Yep.
All right.
If I can speak again to the same motion. My thought is simply to address the procedural matter, which is pressing, and that is appointing councillors at the organizational meeting. I have no difficulty suggesting that the draft terms of reference should include 3 council members. But I think that it might be beneficial to also include others. And so I don't want to establish the committee and part of its terms of reference are engagement, when in fact part of the engagement might be inviting others to sit on the committee with the 3 councillors. So I'm just thinking, I think we could resolve both in the motion if we just had words establishing the draft terms of reference, which will include 3 members of council and supported by the legislative committee. It's not restricted to 3 councillors, though, which is how I read it now.
So if we were to do that, then we'd have the term of reference come back to us for approval. And in the meantime, we could still direct administration to an engagement strategy, or should we wait until you see where I'm going with this? Are we putting the cart before the horse, where maybe we'll do the terms of reference, decide who will be members over and above council, and then go into an engagement strategy with those individuals. So in other words, I'd like you to come join the committee, but we've already decided what the committee's going to do. So that's what where I was going with that. Happy to have that change to be establishing a committee, as you suggested, that we could add others to that committee though.
That's all.
Thank you. My question is for Councillor Melnick. Are you suggesting that the committee, including members of the public, would establish a terms of or is that what or the committee is formed with council first, terms of reference, and then we invite members of the public, or are the public going to participate in establishing terms of reference?
What I'm hearing is that we need to, if we're going to establish this committee, and for the purposes of the organizational committee, we would want to appoint councillors to that. And that was, I think, the time sensitivity of point of the first recommendation. But while we're doing that, administration would draft terms of reference for how that committee would work, and I guess it's the rest of its makeup. And then at that point, once you know the rest of the makeup and the terms of reference, that's where, fostering relationships could best be done, depending on how many other partners you bring into the committee.
Councillor Wexler?
I just wanted to speak in favor of the concept of including others on the committee. I think then it really clarifies that it's a relationship between the community of Jasper versus the municipality of Jasper. And so I think it's important that we do include other members, and it would explain to the public why we might have hesitated this year to send people when there wasn't, to send anyone when there wasn't interest in the community. I think it makes a lot of sense.
I get Councillor Melnick to repeat the motion.
What was the word that you used when you inserted a word there?
Well, I would say establish a committee, including 3 members of council. So just including, so it's not limited,
Okay.
and supported by the legislative services.
All right, so we will, with a little slightly changed verbiage, the committee direct administration to draft terms of reference, establishing a clear focus on the Jasper-Hakone relationship, and establishing a committee including 3 council members and supported by the legislative services team.
Everyone's clear on that?
The question is administration clear on that? I think I know the intent. So we would have 3 council members who could be appointed, but it could include others. It's not restricted necessarily, but we can see the terms of reference. But for the organizational meeting, we would know that there are going to be 3 appointees from council.
Mr. Gibbon?
Yeah, administration is clear on that, and that's exactly the priority Director John and I were talking about, is, understanding for the purpose of the organizational meeting, which is approaching pretty rapidly, what slots council needs to fill, and council will see the terms of reference, and the administration doesn't get to approve the terms of reference. We get to draft it, and they'll bring it back to you to see the duties that are assigned, the roles and responsibilities, the makeup of the committee, and then you'll get to approve it. So that, you know, and that is important work because it is really defines, how much work there will be for administration, how much work there'll be for the committee. And then we'll start the engagement process actually by describing, okay, this is what we think we want this committee to do. Here's how many people we think we need to do that. And that starts that discussion of the community. So, any direction today starts that process, identifies how many slots we need to fill at the organizational meeting among council members, and council will see the terms of reference, return back to a future committee meeting, and then you have a chance to debate different parts of that and what things you want to include and exclude.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon. Any other questions, concerns? I'm going to call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Now we're on to the second motion. Councillor.
The second motion, should we be doing that until we get the committee established?
Good point.
I'll make a second motion. It won't be in the order that that we've got it here, because I want councillors to consider that perhaps the second bullet point may be part of what the terms of reference will be. So I'm going to move right to a motion that committee directed administration to formalize a high school student exchange program by including its oversight in the new committee's terms of reference, and to develop detailed procedures for the exchange program to establish clear roles and responsibilities for the parties involved.
Discussion? So will this become part of the terms of reference for the new committee for the company? Or is it just part of it? Yes, the procedures detailed that they approve and extend them.
Thank you for the question, Acting Deputy Mayor Kelleher MP. I believe the intent is to include the high school student exchange program in the terms of reference to indicate that it's one of the topics to be discussed and provide oversight by the committee, but that the detailed procedures would be more of an administrative document that maybe that committee could review, but I don't know if we would ask you to approve it or not, but it certainly wouldn't be in the terms of reference. It would be a document that gets created in collaboration with the committee, but that would not necessarily be part of the terms of reference.
Thank you for that. Other questions? Mayor Arlen.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor Kelleher MP. Again, I don't mean to engage administration when we're now into debate, but I just want clarity. Maybe Councillor Melnick can clarify it. But the parties involved is not set yet. I take it. The parties would be the municipality, but could also be the school, could also be parents, could also be the students. So it's intentionally open-ended.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Any other concerns, questions? Someone called questions? All those in favor? That is carried. Mayor,
Prior to anyone feeling compelled to make a third motion, I just want to ask administration about that. The second recommendation, would that engagement strategy be separate from the terms of reference or included in the terms of reference?
Acting Deputy Mayor Kelleher MP through Mayor Ireland, I think our train of thought here was that it would be a separate document that would be more like a living document that could get updated annually, or it'd be an output maybe of the committee, but it would not necessarily be part of the terms of reference. But having that said, with the discussion committee just had around how to best engage the public, I think I support Councillor Melnick's approach where we don't need a motion on that. This is something that will come as we progress through the steps. I think I was trying to tick all the boxes and have the plan completely laid out today, which is maybe a bit ambitious. But certainly getting some clarity around how many members to appoint so we're ready for organizational meeting and start developing those documents, I think is the intention here. And certainly getting your support in terms of the high school exchange program now gives us, we can start planning for that and start making some progress. So I think I'm satisfied with the motions that were passed today and don't see a need for a third one.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Thank you for all your work on this.
And then the committee will just look at, okay.
Comments, moving on. Appointments to external boards and committees. Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor. This was again, in relation to organizational meeting coming up, and administration tried to just essentially here give you a framework for discussion. So it's not that we really have a strong recommendation one way or another. So you will see that that's why the recommendation here is that committee receive this report for information, but you might take it where you wish. And essentially, this was based on, there is an item on the motion action list, and it's in reference to the Folk Fest presentation or Jasper Folk and Blues Society, who requested some funding, but also requested, or they actually extended an invitation was the wording in the letter. So take that as you will, to have a council member sit on their board, which prompted discussion among council members around how would you appoint people to external boards, or what's the criteria or potential guidelines? And this was essentially under the discussion was a brainstorm between Ms. Acorn and myself last week, just to be sure that committee had a chance to discuss this. And if there is any process that you wish to bring forth before organizational meeting, before you appoint councillors to external boards and committees, these are some items you might consider, but there might be others. Or in the absence of any further direction or formal process established by committee or council for themselves, those decisions usually happen either at committee of the whole, recommending to org meeting essentially, or at organizational meeting itself, making those changes. But currently there is no process other than these are the types of discussions that happen at organizational meeting.
I believe we also, during the year, appointed the councillor to Outlet Festival, which we were also going to rediscuss at our organizational meeting. We had set a temporary position earlier this year.
Yes, so you're correct that there was an additional appointment that was added, and I believe midstream, perhaps last year, the rural renewal initiative was also one of them. So that was an initiative by the Employment and Education Center that was brought forth to council. Council supported pretty much at the time of the request. And so formal process says it should happen at organizational meeting, but it has happened. So by motion, council has appointed people to different groups. So Uplift being one, and the rural.
I think that was at the organization meeting last year. Because I'm on it. I think it was. I just came in and we added it last minute at the organization meeting last year. Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Keller, MP. So administration's provided, the general outlines of the considerations that council might wish to undertake. We don't have a formalized process, as Representative Don highlighted. And it is a bit subjective about where council wishes to spend its time, and which community initiatives are important enough to dedicate council resources in terms of yourselves. So that's, certainly outside of administration's wheelhouse. But we did want to provide some things you may wish to consider. And you do have that outstanding invitation to the focus. So you may wish to consider that request, thinking about some of the things that are here. You may wish to decline that request based on some of the things that are here. You may wish to consider that request and ask for additional information from the organization about frequency, level of knowledge about, all of those types of things. If there's a term, there's a reference for the board, so that council could have a better understanding of, okay, so if we say yes to this, what are we signing up for? Is this a committee that meets weekly? Does it meet monthly? Does it meet once a year? Because those are vastly different things. Again, not really in the administration realm to decide what's worthy and what's not. But we want to provide a little bit of observations or suggestions on types of things you might wish to consider. We do still have that outstanding motion that was a referral about the Blues and Hopies investment.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor Keller, which is spelled syllables, by the way. I counted backwards. I'm just looking through the boards and committees we already have. Everything on here, I feel like we support financially, maybe, and I wonder if that's a good, if we're going to give a board or committee money, maybe we should be on it to give our input, or are there any, besides our internal committees and boards like legislative or human resources, is there anything on here that we don't support financially, like actually financially? Does that make sense?
I can take that question, Acting Deputy Mayor through to Councillor Hall. I believe the scope of what's being discussed would apply to the last table on the approved list of council appointments. So the external boards and committees being sort of those third party, like Mr. Gibbons said, are their terms of reference somewhere from someone else who's hosting a committee, versus if you look at the top part of the list where it says council, board, or committee, those are they're internal, as in their council, they're established by council. They may have public representation on them, but those are committees that council created, essentially, versus external committees being the list that's here, but potentially every nonprofit in town could be an external board or committee, right? So in the scope of what you might or might not want to consider. And directly to your question, I think the Jasper Artists Guild is not on here as someone you've provided funding to, and that you're and Habitat for the Arts is also not on here, but Habitat has the distinction of it is a private nonprofit, so it does not have a board. It only has directors, or I'm getting a bit out of my depth here in terms of how that actually works, but they don't have a board as a public nonprofit would. And others on here are actually mandated, like the Evergreens Foundation gets a requisition on our property taxes. There's a different arrangement for Community Futures, which is a government organization that's funded federally. So they're not all straightforward in how they're established and how council appointments function. But directly to your question about funding, Habitat and JAG are two examples that are not on the list.
I just wonder if it would be important for there to be council representation on the boards, external boards that we provide money for.
Deputy Mayor Keller, I think that's a reasonable, if council said, boy, that's an area that we're interested in, is making sure that we have some level of oversight of use of municipal tax dollars, then it gets into a question of, so how much? We have the Community and Economic Development Fund, which gives out, $1,500. So now do you dedicate a council member? So I think that's a worthwhile consideration. But as you can see, would say, financial contribution above what level? What would be a question? This larger issue about how council spends its time and how council chooses where it will dedicate council member resources might be a good workshop or strategic planning kind of issue, because there's a bunch of different issues here, and there might be a bunch of different opinions. That might be a good format for council to discuss how to do this broadly. And we have the upcoming organizational meeting, which sort of says, if you want to appoint somebody in the context of that organizational meeting, then you need to tell us that you want to be on that thing. And the first one of those, I guess, or the sort of existing one right now is the festival, the society, society.
I'd be interested to see the Jasper folks in Blue Society in terms of reference. I'm just curious, like the role of a councillor on that versus somebody from administration. I'm just wondering, like, when you look at our role, we're kind of like in governments. We like to have somebody on there that, and they're looking to know about the park or Centennial Park or Commemoration Park. We're not going to be able to help those questions except for bringing it back to a council meeting, putting it back on administration. So I'm wondering, like, for some of those committees, would it be best somebody from administration to sit on there? So I think at one time there was, and I don't know if it's still there, there was, Ms. Don might be able to help me with this. There used to be Crew Tourism Jasper and the Events and Festival Committee. And I think somebody from administration sat on there about events and festivals that were brought into town, that sort of thing. I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I think that there'd be a couple of different, different layers there. Administration works with a number of different organizations, community organizations, and Tourism Jasper certainly. I am, along with Mayor Ireland, Tourism Jasper asked for representatives on the steering committee for their destination management plan. And so they have Mayor Ireland and myself to provide, I think, political and administrative perspective. I have also been on the steering committee for the labor market analysis work that's going on out of G. So, administration does work with lots of community organizations. I think the question becomes, okay, so is the group looking for political perspective or administrative perspective? And in either case, again, this is subjective. I don't think that there's a clear answer, and the answer to this might change between different councils at different times. Does providing either an administrative resource or a council resource create a perceived conflict of interest? And I say perceived because these would be voluntary, but there is always a bit of a challenge. I think council members have probably experienced it as you head into budget. If you're a council representative on a board or committee or agency, are you supposed to be advocating for their funding request? Is it up to that group to advocate for their funding request? As a council member, are you expected at the council table to vote for it? Which I think you're not, by the way. At the council table, you're a council member and you have to vote in the interest of the entire municipality. But sometimes that can come into conflict or at least friction with the interests of the organization, because it might not be in with your councillor hat on. It might say, well, this isn't the time to be funding increased community group funding. But with your external organization hat on, you may say, well, we absolutely need that funding. And that is always a challenge. And again, another one of those types of issues that might be worth council having a bit of an offline discussion just to see where everybody's feelings are on this issue at that time. And then, out of that kind of discussion, you'd be able to give administration some direction on I don't know if it's a policy or a procedure. I think it would be a council policy on appointments to external boards and committees to say, these are the situations in which we will appoint council members. And these are the types of things that we consider. And here are the things that we expect you, external organization, to tell us, council, before we even consider your request. How often do you meet? For reference, are you legal? All those kinds of things. I appreciate it. And there's a lot there, sorry. So that's why administration is saying, we're not sure that we've got this solved for you. We think you probably want to receive this report for information. And maybe it's a refer to council's 2024 strategic planning session. That would start to build an agenda where we have a discussion about that. And then we just would want to make sure that we don't miss out, because it is on our motion action list, about the society and that one request that we do have. And I think council needs to make a determination of maybe it's not at this time. because council needs to have this bigger discussion, or maybe it's sure, we'll do that now. And then we'll have a discussion and see, whether we continue to sit there after the fact. I think both those are possible, but you probably need to give some kind of decision.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor Calarapi. To administration, is there anything else in the procedure bylaw that relates to this? So the background that you've provided speaks to section 20.13.4. But that, as I read it, is appointments of members of the public to bodies on which the municipality is entitled to have representation. That's different than appointment of members of council. And entitled to have representation is specific wording as well. And so I don't know whether that was ever intended to mean invited to have representation. My concern here is that we ought to have some framework for appointment of councillors and perhaps in addition, members of the public to various bodies, but councillors for sure. And that could be by way of policy, but it's now very loosely covered in the procedural bylaw, which is undergoing review. So my thought is that these sorts of criteria that we're discussing should become revealed and clarified in that bylaw moving forward so that we know. Right now, it is on reflection so open-ended. There are so many groups in town that could invite us to be members. And apart from capacity issues, there are other issues of perceived conflict, at least. So my suggestion might be that we receive the report for information and direct the legislative committee to consider appropriate criteria in the redrafting of the procedure bylaw. It just seems to me it presents a great opportunity for us to focus some effort on this, but it ought to be effort that results in clarity for future councils about what it means to appoint councillors, not members of the public, various committees. I mean, I suppose we were invited to appoint a councillor to PDAP. I think we want to figure out whether that would be on site or not. We support all sorts of groups. We've given funding to the ski club. I don't think they're going to invite us, but they could. The skate park association, the bike park association, every group out there might see an advantage in having a councillor. And that I think wouldn't be good for councillors to be so drawn in different directions, but it also in the end, it doesn't help the community if the councillor is there because it's seen as a municipal program. So I think we want to be careful. I think we should develop criteria that helps guide us. And I think that probably that criteria should be in a bylaw, and the procedure bylaw is maybe the place where it ought to be.
Ms. Nazan?
Acting Deputy Mayor through the Mayor Ireland. I think I would support my legislative advice on this one would support Mr. Gibbons or CEO Gibbons' approach outlined earlier, which maybe that belongs in a policy is my view on the matter. The piece that we haven't discussed as part of the previous item or this item is a boards and committees bylaw. So currently it is embedded as part of the procedure bylaw, and essentially the municipality's responsibility under the Municipal Government Act is that any council boards or committees must be established by bylaw, which currently the library is the only one that's part of the procedure bylaw. But then referring to the document the council appointments document. Every board or committee that is listed in that first area has to be established by bylaw, which the Emergency Advisory Committee is. But then a Twin Communities Committee, an HR committee, a legislative committee should all be established by bylaw. So Ms. Acorn and myself have been working on a draft boards and committees bylaw, which would capture all these terms of reference, and then we would be compliant with the act. There's no real further indication that other boards and committees matters, such as criteria for appointing to external boards or committees, would need to be part of a bylaw. A policy might be a better tool for that, but that is also something that, to Mayor Ireland's point, could be discussed by the legislative committee or something we could look into further, but certainly documenting whatever criteria or guideline council lands on in a formal legislative document for use by future councils is an appropriate course of action. I'm just not sure that a bylaw is the way to go.
Thank you for that, Ms. Nadal. Mayor Ireland, is that your motion?
It will be. My motion will be that committee receive this report for information and refer the development of criteria for the appointments to external boards and committees to the legislative committee. So whether it be policy or bylaw is undetermined. We have a legislative committee that I think is well suited to look at this and refer the matter there.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. Any other discussion? Councillor Hall.
I wonder if there'd be any objection to also adding to refer to Council 2024 strategic planning session for discussion.
Do we have that?
I'm sure we will.
I don't mind. I'm not opposed to adding that.
Councillor Wexler.
I apologize, but the sound was quite muffled and I couldn't hear what Councillor Hall said.
I just asked if there would be any objection to adding to Mayor Ireland's motion, referring this to a Council 2024 strategic planning session for discussion.
Thank you.
Members of council like to add this to 2024 strategic planning session. We have it. Okay. Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. And you have clear direction, Mr. Rubin. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Null. Motion action list, Mr. Gibbon.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Keller MP. So there are a few items that administration has updated. You can see the recommendation on the Clean Energy Improvement Program, deferring that into the new year. That's just the Hakone, Japan item from February 14th has probably been dealt with and replaced by the action coming out of today's meeting. Same with the indoor track feasibility study, I believe can also be deleted. And the first part of the early learning childcare strategy, which was specific around amendments to the document. There's still an item there around a letter to the provincial government. So that would remain, that the first part could be deleted. Indoor feasibility track study item could be deleted. And the Hakone Japan initiative item could be deleted again because it's been replaced. The other one that I would flag would be the Jasper Folk Music Festival item. I don't know that we're gonna have another committee meeting or council meeting before the organizational meeting, but council really just deferred that discussion. There's no direction to administration to provide a report. We can put that as an item on an upcoming meeting, but council does is sort of in charge of making a determination on that item. The items for deletion, the Hakone Japan, inter-track feasibility study, and the first part of the early learning childcare strategy are the recommendations from the administration, along with the bumping of the clean energy equipment program.
Any questions from Mr. Gibbon? Councillor Miller.
No, not a question. And if there are no questions, I'd be happy to make the motion that committee approve the updated motion action list. Oh, there is a
Just
question.
before. The second action item under the early learning childcare strategy, recommending the council write a letter. That's the same information that Councillor Hall presented at the start of the meeting. So are we considering that is closed, or is that outstanding? We've received the early childcare strategy, but a letter in particular, I'm just wondering if that is off the table now, or can it come off the table?
I think that's a question for council. If you're satisfied with what you heard at the conference and that there's not a room to advocate with that, that knowledge doesn't change. If that knowledge changes the need for advocacy, then council can choose to eliminate this item, or if that knowledge informs the advocacy that you might like to take, then you can incorporate that. The motion is that committee recommend council write a letter. I think your worship that generally tends to follow you. And so administration would be happy to provide any information that you needed in order to write that letter. If committee determines that it's still important, if committee says, well, we've heard an answer and therefore we don't need anything further, that's up to you. You certainly could delete that item, and then the other early learning and childcare strategy would be off this entirely.
And I would suggest that it can come off. So rather than me rely on administration to write a letter to request information that we have, now that we have the information, we can consider further advocacy, but the request was just to get the timeline, and we've got the timeline. So I know the letter hasn't gone out, but I think it could legitimately come off the motion action list if council is satisfied with that.
Councillor Wexler.
I think I'm not totally satisfied because I believe it was me that made the motion in the first place. And I was particularly concerned by the childcare manager's comment that she didn't believe that Jasper would ever get to the $10 a day level. And I guess we also don't have information yet on what the steps will be in moving toward the $10 a day. We know that that they're aiming for, I think, January of 2027 to be there, but I think we're still a long ways from that, and there are multiple provinces that are already at the $10 a day status. So I would like to have more information on what the plan is and the steps involved in getting there.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor. I agree with Councillor Waxer. While I was given an answer, I wasn't satisfied with it, and I think that there could be some more advocacy from the municipality.
In other words, keep it on there.
So we'll keep it on there.
Well, Deputy Mayor Keller MP, I think the council is talking about different advocacy.
Yeah.
And so what you may want to do is say, okay, fine, we have an answer about that. And this is where the motion action is helpful, right? Like you can say, okay, that's changed. Now we may want to put advocacy in support of blank, 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 blank on a future committee meeting. And then council could describe to administration, what kind of advocacy do you mean? Do you want us to book a bus and take us to the legislature? Do you want to write a letter? And I'm being a bit facetious, but advocacy has a pretty broad range of actions associated with it. And so there's an issue. Why don't you refer that issue to a future committee meeting? And then at that committee meeting, we would at least as administration provide a brief report saying, here's what we know. And then from there, council could decide what kind of advocacy steps you might like to take and what kind of direction you would need to give administration to activate that advocacy. So I think at this time, if there's an issue, it would be to refer that issue to a future committee level meeting. And I think that that's reasonable. It comes up in the context of the motion action list. There's a motion, we say, well, we are done with that one. But something new is arising. We'd like to talk about that in the future.
Any motion?
I might need some time to figure that out. Yes, unless Councillor Waxer wants to do it.
Kathleen?
Councillor Wexler, you have your hand up?
I think I still stand by my original comment that I feel that I would still like to have clarity, because I think that will give us a lot of information as we move forward on the childcare strategy, our own strategy. I think that a letter requesting that information was, although we may not get what we're looking for, but at my from Ms. Daniels, she indicated the childcare providers are kept in the dark as to what the next steps will be. So I think it's actually important information for us to know.
Councillor Hall?
I can move that committee recommend Councillor for the matter of advocacy on the bilateral agreement for childcare to a future committee of the whole meeting. So work.
Yeah, I think that works, and committee can do that directly. It doesn't need to go up to council to come back down to committee.
Okay.
Bookmark it. The committee can choose to bookmark it in the future.
All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Anything else on the motion on this?
Not as far as I can tell.
Okay, I'm going to call the motion to accept.
Okay.
All those in favor? That is carried.
Did I make that motion?
Yes, you did.
All right. Just checking.
You did. That's for conversation. Councillors' appointments, board and committees, upcoming meetings. Councillor Hall?
Thank you, Acting Deputy Mayor. Tomorrow morning, I'm heading out to Roslyn, BC for the Mountain Town Planners Summit. I'll be there for 2 full days, and I'm very excited to come back next week and let you guys all know what I learned.
Awesome. Councillor Melnick?
Yes, I have the Jasper Yellowhead Historical Society monthly meeting. And beyond that, I will see you at the next meeting.
Thank you for that, Councillor Melnick. Anybody else? No? Okay. Looks like there's a couple of busy days here in October. Tomorrow we have the Jasper Fall Business Walk with community teachers. Is there anybody attending the? I'm going to go for the morning. I can't do the afternoon, but I will attend at 10:15 tomorrow at the Robson House to do the morning session, but I can't miss the afternoon session. NETMA. It's on October 18th at the Jasper Yellowhead Museum and Archives. Dark Sky Festival starts October 12th to 22nd. Welcoming Week, October 21st to 28th. for organization and meeting followed the 9:30 committee of the whole on October 24th. Community Culture Night 5 to 8, October 28th at the Jasper Activity Center. External group budget presentation 9:30 November 14th. And budget presentation is 9 a.m. start both days, November 21st and 22nd. Is there anything else to add to that list? Councillor Hall.
Thank you. This evening at 7 p.m. at Terra is the Pride Society AGM.
Nothing else? Okay, I know. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Hall, all in favor? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us by Zoom. Thank you, Councillor Webster. We will see you next Tuesday. Enjoy your week with family. And everyone have a great week.